Mid-19th century, Japan had kept its doors firmly locked to the outside world for over 200 years. But when heavily armed foreign ships suddenly showed up and forced those doors open, the entire country basically exploded into a frenzy of rebellion. Welcome to Bakumatsu, Spark Before the Storm, Koshiro Fujita. Today, we're tracking a young samurai who stood right in the dead center of that chaos, lighting a fire that would end up engulfing the whole nation. Let's dive in.
I want you to picture this. It's the dead of winter, 1864. You're in a coastal town called Suruga, facing the freezing sea of Japan. You're locked inside a wooden storehouse built for herring. There's no heat, the walls are caked in rotting fish oil, and the stench is absolutely unbearable. And all around you are hundreds of captured rebels, stripped of their warm clothes, freezing, and literally dying of cold and starvation.
Sitting right there among these men who are just waiting for execution is their leader. Now, he's not some battle-hardened old general. He's a sharp-looking, highly educated young samurai named Koshiro Fujita. And get this, he's only 24 years old. So how on earth did this brilliant young guy end up leading hundreds of people straight into this absolute hell?
Chapter 1, The Wild Child in a Strict World. Well, to understand how Koshiro ended up in that freezing storehouse, we really need to rewind a bit and look at his roots. Koshiro's dad, Toko Fujita, was an incredibly famous, rigid scholar who held a massive amount of political power. But Koshiro, he was the complete opposite. He was basically a wild child. In fact, his dad once joked about his sons, saying, "If there's something they want behind a locked door, my other boys will wait for permission. But Koshiro, he'll just smash the lock to get inside." He was just that passionate, totally unstoppable.
But underneath that rule-breaking, rebellious exterior, there was a lot of deep tragedy. When Koshiro was just 2 years old, his mother, who was of a lower social standing, was actually exiled from their home. Then, when he was 13, a massive earthquake struck Japan. Tragically, his famous father was crushed underneath a collapsing building and killed. From that day on, this wild kid had to shoulder the immense, suffocating pressure of being the heir to a legendary figure. And along with that heavy legacy, Koshiro inherited his father's fierce political ideology. It was a movement that was absolutely electrifying the youth of Japan at the time. To put it simply, the rule was, protect the emperor with your life and kick out all foreign influence. That's it. This radical, unbending belief was burned into Koshiro's mind from a very young age.
Chapter 2, Spark on the Mountain. Time moved on, and as Koshiro grew into a young adult, the moment arrived for him to smash the lock on a much bigger door. By 1864, Japanese politics was a total powder keg waiting to blow. Massive foreign warships were constantly pushing the country to open its borders. And the shogunate, the military government actually running Japan, had promised to drive the foreigners out, but they weren't doing a thing about it. For 22-year-old Koshiro, the time for talking was officially over. He decided to take matters into his own hands, gathering a group of young, like-minded guys on the sacred Mount Tsukuba. What started as just 62 rebels exploded overnight into a massive army of over 1,400 members. They were called the Tengu-to, or the Tengu Party. Now, a Tengu is a Japanese goblin with a long nose, and politicians actually gave them this nickname as an insult, basically calling them arrogant, long-nosed snobs. But Koshiro's crew loved it. They completely owned the insult and wore the name like a badge of honor. But here's where useful ideals violently clash with reality. You see, trying to control 1,400 armed men without any real funding, it's pretty much impossible. Desperate for money, rogue factions within the group completely spun out of control. They started setting fire to local villages, robbing people, and committing terrible violence. Almost overnight, Koshiro's noble rebellion was seen by the public as just a vicious, uncontrollable mob. Chapter 3, The March and the Betrayal. Completely surrounded by enemies and having lost the support of the very people they wanted to protect, Koshiro makes one final, desperate gamble. They decided to march hundreds of miles west to the capital city of Kyoto to appeal directly to the emperor. But this was literally a death march. They had to fight their way through heavily armed enemy forces while trekking across brutal, snow-covered mountain trails in the dead of winter. Exhausted and freezing, they eventually made it to that coastal town of Tsukuba. So why undertake such a suicidal march? Because Koshiro had one shred of hope left. He believes that if he could just reach Kyoto and talk to a highly powerful and respected leader named Yoshinobu Tokugawa, Yoshinobu would understand and support them. But here comes the crushing reality. the commander of the massive army sent to completely wipe out Koshiro's rebels, it was Yoshinobu himself, the very man Koshiro idolized. Koshiro's entire journey was fueled by this naive, pure thought: if I just march to Kyoto, if I just speak to him face to face, he will surely understand my true heart. But the second he realized his ultimate hero was the one coming to kill him, Koshiro's spirit just broke. Refusing to raise his sword against the man he respected most, Koshiro and the Tengu-to finally surrendered. Epilogue: a samurai's legacy. The rebellion was crushed, but Koshiro's impact on history? That was actually just beginning. Which brings us right back to that horrifying scene from the start. The surrendered young men were stripped of their winter clothes and crammed into that foul-smelling herring storehouse in Suruga. The conditions were so unsanitary and brutal that many rebels just collapsed and died from disease before they even saw a trial. And the scale of the executions that followed is absolutely staggering, even by historical standards. 352 people. An insane number, including their veteran co-leader Takeda Konsai. Hundreds of rebels were systematically and mercilessly beheaded. Yet, even kneeling before the executioner's blade, Koshiro refused to let go of his beliefs. His final death poem is so incredibly powerful. He wrote, "I am happy to finally tell my true heart to the emperor." Even in his absolute final moments, that fiery idealism never flickered out. Koshiro Fujita was only 24 years old when he was executed. Just think about that for a second. This guy broke the rules, led an army of over 1,000 men, made some devastatingly fatal mistakes, but stayed totally true to his convictions. His incredibly intense life was completely cut short before he even reached his 25th birthday. But here's the thing, his story didn't die in the snow that day. Before the rebellion, Koshiro had profoundly impacted a young man who would actually survive the era. That man was Eiichi Shibusawa, a guy who would later become known as the father of Japanese capitalism, building the entire economic foundation of modern Japan. Shibusawa never forgot Koshiro. He publicly praised Koshiro's pure, unwavering devotion to his true heart. That youthful, rebellious spark lived on, directly inspiring the leaders who built the modern era. Koshiro Fujita definitely wasn't a perfect hero. He made massive, tragic mistakes. But his unbreakable will and absolute passion left a permanent mark on the people who shaped the future. So it leaves us with something to think about. What about the fire inside of you? What kind of legacy will your youthful spark leave on history?